Our guest is the author of a book called The Amateur. You've definitely seen this book being talked about. It's been all over Fox News. It's been all over the media. It's been the subject, the fodder for a number of stories, Daily Caller, you name it. You've seen them out there, the Jeremiah Wright bribe story, and on and on. Our guest, the author, Edward Klein. Ed, thanks for being with us.
It's great to be with you this morning.
So, I was reading some reviews of the book, and one of the things, one of the notes I see is that Klein conducted nearly 200 interviews with Obama's friends and disillusioned colleagues, compiling almost 1,000 pages of notes, which contain some very startling revelations, incompetent blunders, and arrogant mismanagement. And I thought to myself, oh, this is one of the guys that's a talking head at Fox News. And then I look at your pedigree, and I see former foreign editor for Newsweek magazine, former editor-in-chief of the New York Times magazine, contributing editor of Vanity Fair. This is not the pedigree of a guy who criticizes Barack Obama.
Well, you got to keep in mind that when I was at Newsweek in the New York Times, those were straight organizations. They were not left-wing organizations.
When you say they were straight organizations, you mean they didn't call Barack Obama the first gay president and put a halo over his head?
That's right. In my day, back in Newsweek days, the good old days, Newsweek was a down-the-middle-of-the-road operation, and the New York Times was not what it's become. And as far as I'm concerned, I see myself, and I've been doing this for almost half a century, as a reporter. And this is a reporter's book. It's not a committed ideologue's book. I went out and I said to myself, look, here's a guy who came out, I'm talking about Barack Obama now, came out of nowhere. Nobody had ever heard of him. He had accomplished nothing in his 7 years in the Illinois State Legislature and 2 years in the U.S. Senate. And yet millions and millions of people voted for him because they believed in his hope and change thing. And then what happened? He became something we've never seen before in American history, an amateur in the White House. And that's why I call the book The Amateur.
You call the book The Amateur, and you also quote Bill Clinton saying that he's incompetent.
Well, Bill Clinton is, I guess one could say, whether you like his politics or not, one of the great politicians of his age. He's a smart guy. He understands how politics works. He believes that Barack Obama is incompetent and that the people around him are incompetent. They're basically a bunch of either Chicago operatives or academics from Harvard who have never held a real job in their life and don't really know how the world works. Bill feels that Hillary would have been a heck of a better president, and he has never given up the hope that she will be president. And I have a scene in the book based on firsthand reporting with two people who were present when Bill Clinton urged his wife to challenge Barack Obama for the 2012 presidential nomination. He said to her, "You are much better suited to be president. I've done a secret poll. The poll shows you can beat this guy. We need to be back in the White House. I mean, you need to be back in the White House." And
at what point was that? How long ago was that?
That was in August 2011, almost a year ago.
And Ed Klein is our guest. The book is The Amateur. He wanted her to resign her position as Secretary of State and as Secretary of State and run against
challenge the sitting president.
Why didn't she?
Because I think she was smarter than he was on this score. I think she would have been, first of all, I think she would have been defeated. Number one, it's almost impossible to unseat a seated president. And number two, she would have destroyed her credibility inside the Democratic Party as a Democratic loyalist. This way, she's has a record of having been loyal to Barack Obama for the first 4 years of his term. She's going to resign after this election, however it turns out. And she's in a great position to start campaigning for 2016.
Ed, you talk about his cabinet and what type of people he brings in, and we don't know much about them. Unlike the cabinets of the past, who are the two or three that he is listening to the most?
Well, that's a very, very good question. The Speaker of the House, John Boehner, says that he's been in the House for 20 years, has been through 4 different administrations, and that he finds this administration the most opaque, that's his word, opaque administration. He can't understand who is calling the shots. I spent a great deal of time looking into this, and in my view, the person who calls the shots more than any other inside the White House is a woman by the name of Valerie Jarrett. She is Michelle Obama's oldest, dearest, closest friend, her advisor, and simultaneously the advisor to the President of the United States. This is a woman who rose through the daily machine in Chicago, who has never had any foreign experience, no economic, financial experience, and in fact didn't have much of a record in Chicago, but is a loyalist and who the Obamas trust to protect them from what they perceive as a very scary and threatening outside world. So she's the gatekeeper. You cannot go see Obama. Nobody. I don't care if you're Oprah Winfrey, Caroline Kennedy, a black leader like Jesse Jackson. You don't get into the White House to see the president unless you go through Valerie Jarrett.
I have about 30 seconds left in this segment. To what extent, we're going to get to the Oprah and Michelle rift, to what extent is Michelle an actual advisor making policy and telling him what to do?
Tremendously so. I mean, she'd like us to believe she's just a happy homemaker doing the anti-obesity campaign. But in fact, in my view and the view of the people who work in the White House, she's his most important advisor.
All right, Ed Klein, can you hold with us?
Sure.
The book is The Amateur. It hit bookstores, I guess, yesterday. More shocking revelations from The Amateur with the author, Ed Klein. Coming up. Right now we are talking to Ed Klein. His new book is all the buzz. It's The Amateur. I very rarely tell people, go out and buy a book. In fact, we don't do a lot of book interviews. Figure, you know what? You can figure out what's good. But I'm going to tell you something. This is really impressive. The work that's been done, the things that have been exposed, very rarely does a book, in my opinion, break ground on 4 or 5 major issues of the day. Usually there's one startling revelation that if you go to page 121, you read the book, and that was what they used, the salacious little detail. This thing is chock full of truly groundbreaking research and details. I'm very impressed. Ed Klein, I'm officially your new PR man.
Well, you have, I'm blushing here in embarrassment. Thank you so much for those kind words.
The book is The Amateur. Go buy it, folks. Let's get into some of these issues. We were talking about Michelle and her influence over Barack Obama. Who really cares about Oprah? But it's an interesting deep dive into the psychology of this man and kind of the dysfunctional relationship between him and his wife as it governs who's going to run the White House.
You could not be more right about that. You're so right. I mean, he was very grateful, naturally, to Oprah for endorsing him in the primary campaign over Hillary Clinton, which was major, huge, and then for campaigning for him during the election campaign. And during the transition, he was on the phone with Oprah all the time. And when Valerie Jarrett, who is his chief advisor and Michelle's chief advisor, heard about this, she went to Michelle, who is a very, very, I don't know what the word is, obsessive, jealous, demanding wife. And Michelle felt, what's going on here? I'm the first lady. I'm the person he should be listening to. He should be listening to me and Valerie. And instead, he's coming to me and saying, oh, Oprah thinks we should redecorate the Lincoln bedroom. Oh, Oprah thinks we should do this. And it really didn't go down well with Michelle, who has enormous influence over her husband. Enormous. At least as much, if not more, than, say, for instance, Nancy Reagan over Ronald Reagan, or Jimmy Carter's wife. So, you know, they like to pretend that you're not getting 2 for the price of 1 with the Obamas, but you really are.
It's interesting. Speaking of people from his past in Chicago, A lot has been talked about over the last few days over the Jeremiah Wright revelations,
Yes.
your interview with him, and the potential offer of a bribe. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, I went to Jeremiah Wright, who's no longer the pastor of the Trinity United Church of Christ. He's retired. He's 70 years old. And thanks to some mutual friends, he agreed to sit down with me face-to-face with a tape recorder running and let me interview him, which I did for over 3 hours in his office at the Kwame Nkrumah Academy, which is a charter school named after the Marxist dictator of Ghana, the former Marxist dictator of Ghana. And I asked him every single question there was that I could think of, and he told this amazing story that during the 2008 campaign, Barack Obama's closest friend, Eric Whitaker, who's the vice president of the University of Chicago Medical Center, sent an email offering the Reverend Wright $150,000 if he would shut up and not talk anymore during the campaign because he had embarrassed Barack Obama so much. He was the single biggest embarrassment to Barack Obama. And when Jeremiah Wright refused this offer of a bribe, he then got a phone call from the campaigner himself, Barack Obama, saying, "I'd like to meet with you secretly." And they did have this secret meeting in the then parsonage of the Trinity United Church of Christ. I double-checked this with the Secret Service logs, and in fact, yes, that's exactly where Barack Obama was that day.
Ed, you ended a paragraph with an interesting statement by Jeremiah Wright, the man who was his pastor for 20 years. Audacity of Hope is named after his sermon. He called him a father figure. You quote Jeremiah Wright as saying of the meeting, "I don't know whether he wore a wire or not." That was troubling to me.
It was troubling to me.
Did Jeremiah Wright suspect he may have worn a wire?
Yes, he did.
Wow. You know, you mentioned the name Eric Whitaker and how credible that bribe offer is. Daily Caller has a piece today. Longtime Obama pal Eric Whitaker keeps popping onto the political scene. For people who don't know who Eric Whitaker is, tell us.
Eric Whitaker is one of the closest friends the Obamas have. He plays basketball with Obama. He goes on vacations with Obama. He's as I said, the vice president of the University of Chicago Medical Center. He's he got caught up in a scandal involving that political fixer, if you recall, Tony Rezko, who was subsequently sent to jail. Whitaker was never formally charged with that, but his reputation was certainly tarnished. He traveled with Obama on the campaign trail in 2008. He goes, as I say, on vacation with he and his wife. They're very, very close. They've been close since college days because when Obama was at law school at Harvard, Whitaker was at Harvard as well, not in law school, but at Harvard as well. So they go back that far. And when Obama, needs something done personally, he turns to Eric Whitaker. And Eric Whitaker was the guy who sent this email to the Reverend Wright.
Rezko now serving 10.5 years in prison for political corruption. And interestingly, from an article today, Obama said, from your book, in a 2008 interview with the Chicago Sun-Times, he could only recall speaking to Tony Rezko about filling a state job one time, when he recommended Eric Whitaker be hired as Illinois' Director of Public Health. Fast forward, you note in the book that Whitaker's group got $5.9 million in a taxpayer grant from a program that was actually created by Michelle when she was at the university.
That's right.
Wow.
It's one hand washes the other with those in that Chicago crowd.
Well, the dearth of research that's been done on the level that you've done where you go back and actually tie this. It's one thing to say there's a culture of corruption, but you've actually gone back and tied it up. You know, I don't think a lot of Republicans care what Caroline Kennedy has to say about Barack Obama, but it is rather telling, the souring toward folks. You quote her as saying, "I can't stand to hear Obama's voice anymore. He's a liar and worse." Why?
Well, because she's, Caroline Kennedy is a liberal with a capital L. I mean, she's very far left. And she expected to be a major figure in that.
Ed, I put you up against a break, my man, and I know you have somewhere else to be. The book is wonderful. Everyone buy it. We'll have you back on soon.
It's been great. Thanks
Ed
so
Klein
much.
is the author. The Amateur. Go buy it. It's fantastic.